Listen, before I get to my next guest, I want to make sure that you're aware of a new book that's about to be published. It's by FRC's very own David Closson. David's book is entitled Life After Roe, Equipping Christians in the Fight for Life Today. Friends, I received my advanced copy last week, and it's a terrific book. Basically, it looks at abortion and the whole life issue from a theological, a biblical, historical, and a political perspective. All of this wrapped up in one volume. And here's the exciting part. Washington Watch viewers and listeners can get a 40% special discount. Just simply using a code. So go to lifeway.com. That's where you can get the book, lifeway.com, and just do a search for Life After Roe, and then use the code Washington Watch at checkout. That's Washington Watch without any spaces, just Washington Watch, and you'll get 40% off. I hope you will take advantage of this. It's a great, great book. All right, speaking of David Closson, it's been another big week in Washington and around the country, and as always, we like to end the week and the program by thinking about all the headlines through a biblical worldview lens. And joining me now to talk about some of those issues is David Closson himself. He is, of course, the director of the Center for Biblical Worldview here at FRC. David, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to have you. Happy Friday.
Well, happy Friday. It's a joy to be with you as well, Jody.
All right. So, listen, we've got a lot to talk about, as we always do on Fridays, and I do want to get particularly to President Trump's address to Congress. But before we get there, David, I want to ask you about a story that's related to abortion. It occurred just a couple of days ago in the state of Idaho. Can you bring us up to speed on that particular decision that the Justice Department made in relation to abortion in that state?
Absolutely, Jody. And really, this is just the latest evidence that the Trump administration, as they've found their footing very quickly, has moved to overturn many of the decisions of the Biden-Harris administration. Now, Jody, during the Biden-Harris administration, you and I had many conversations on just how aggressive that the previous administration was on pushing abortion on demand wherever they could, whenever they could. And so the case you're referring to is out of Idaho. So, the long story short is, once Roe v. Wade was overturned on June 24, 2022, many pro-life states, including Idaho, had laws that were allowed to go into effect. And so Idaho's law specifically was called the Idaho Defense of Life Act, which protected unborn children. Unfortunately, the Biden administration moved to sue the state of Idaho. And it's interesting, the argument they used a 1986 law signed by President Reagan known as the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. This is legislation, again, that President Reagan signed that simply said that pregnant women and their children, regardless of the ability to pay, if they show up in an emergency room, they need to be provided care. The Biden administration argued that federal law from 1986 required emergency rooms to provide abortion services, which is insane. Nowhere in the original law was this part of that. This went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court actually declined to hear the case on the merits. They sent it back to the lower court. And so as this was about to go to trial and kind of go through the case, the Trump administration notified the court that they are changing position, so again, long story short, Jody, this shows us that the Trump administration very clearly is sending a signal they're going to respect states' rights when it comes to the life issue. They've already taken federal actions, protecting the Hyde Amendment, reinstating the Mexico City policy, re-entering the Geneva Consensus Declaration. And so this is just the latest signal that under the Trump administration, specifically, this is the Justice Department, pro-life policies are being honored and pursued. We have much to be thankful for.
Wow, we really do. That's huge news, and probably a lot of our listeners and viewers didn't catch that. That's one of those things that's just kind of gone under the radar, so thanks for bringing us up to speed on that. If I can switch gears with you, David, I think probably obviously the most important event of the week in Washington this past week was President Trump's address to the joint session of Congress. And I want to get to a couple of specific questions for you. But before we get to that, just kind of your overall reflection on the speech. I know you've had time to think about it over the last few days. So what's your general reaction? And also, what did you think was the impact of the speech?
Well, Jody, I'll be honest, I really enjoyed the speech. And I know when you were a member of Congress, you got to sit in and actually watch some of those speeches in person, which must have been an awesome experience. But watching the speech on Tuesday, it was history making. It was the longest speech of its type, 1 hour and 40 minutes. And I think it's clear, Jody, that President Trump has a mandate. He won all 7 swing states. He increased his margin across almost every demographic imaginable, whether it's African Americans, Hispanics, young voters. And President Trump has moved swiftly in these first couple of weeks in acting the agenda that he ran on. And I think in this speech, he just made it clear that he feels that he has this mandate, whether it's on immigration, whether it's on foreign policy, whether it's on the economy. And clearly, he feels that he has the support of the American people. And so, there was a lot of issues, and I think we'll get into some of the specifics, Jody, that those of us who are social conservatives that care deeply about creation order issues, specifically the issue of gender ideology. It's just interesting that he specifically chose that issue to really highlight. And I guess one other general comment, Jody, is it was regrettable, in my view, to see, the reaction of the Democrats. This is the party of democracy, and they just seemed intent on debasing democratic norms even further. That was regrettable. But overall, I think most Americans who tuned into the speech were probably encouraged that Trump is clearly pursuing the agenda that he ran on.
Yeah, 76%. In fact, with a CBS poll afterwards, we're in agreement with that. So let's get to some of the specifics you mentioned. President Trump highlighted, as you brought up, the issue of transgender ideology. I want to play a clip of one of the comments he made specific on that issue and get your reaction to this.
Shortly after taking office, I signed an executive order banning public schools from indoctrinating our children with transgender ideology. I also signed an order to cut off all taxpayer funding to any institution that engages in the sexual mutilation of our youth. And now I want Congress to pass a bill permanently banning and criminalizing sex changes on children and forever ending the lie that any child is trapped in the wrong body. This is a big lie. And our message to every child in America is that you are perfect exactly the way God made you.
That's powerful stuff. David, give me your response to President Trump using really the bully pulpit that he had as the president of the United States to highlight such an important issue.
Jody, it is just refreshing after the last 4 of those speeches that President Biden gave, where it was the opposite, where kind of the LGBTQ plus agenda was just continually being pushed front and center, being shoved down the throats of tens of millions of Americans that don't agree with that ideology. To hear President Trump just speak with, common sense, that's a word that President Trump and many in his administration have been using a lot. And I'm going to go a step further and say that these are issues of creation order. Now, these are Genesis 1 and 2 issues. And, so much has happened in Washington, D.C. in just these first 6 or 7 weeks that I think, the avalanche of news, whether it's the immigration stuff, whether it's the economic information. But for those of us who are social conservatives, and one of the reasons, Washington Watch exists is to make sure that SAGECons, these spiritually active, governance-engaged conservatives, are in the know. And one of the things we've talked about is these executive orders, and specifically what President Trump was doing right there was highlighting 2 specific executive orders that he signed within the first week of his presidency. There was one executive order, Jody, that specifically prohibits any tax dollars to go to the mutilation of children. And what does President Trump mean by that, using that very clear language? This would be cross cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, or physical surgeries that, of course, irreversibly harm and castrate children. This is something the Biden administration pushed. Trump has drawn a clear line in the sand. And the other executive order he was referring to was one from January 29th. It's entitled Ending Radical Indoctrination in K through 12 Schooling. And it specifically, in the executive order, prohibits schools, under the jurisdiction of the Department of Education, this would be all public schools in America, from using gender ideology or DEI as part of the curriculum. And so much has happened in D.C. I'm grateful that the president decided to use his primetime speech to underscore some things that I think every social conservative in America should be grateful for.
Absolutely, and he did it with such precision and clarity. Refreshing, the word you use, just so spot on with that. Elsewhere in the speech, David, President Trump discussed another issue related to the whole transgender issue, but that's about women's sports. In fact, he invited Peyton McNabb, who's a women's volleyball player, to sit there with the First Lady. But McNabb is the one I think most people probably remember. She gained attention. She was a volleyball player, got hit in the face with a volleyball that was spiked by a biological man, and experienced traumatic brain injury. I want to play a clip again for you from that portion of the speech and get your reaction to this.
And if you really want to see numbers, just take a look at what happened in the women's boxing, weightlifting, track and field, swimming, or cycling, where a male recently finished a long-distance race 5 hours and 14 minutes ahead of a woman for a new record by 5 hours. Broke the record by 5 hours. It's demeaning for women, and it's very bad for our country. We're not going to put up with it any longer.
Demeaning for women. All right, again, your response.
Again, how encouraging it is to have the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, looking out over the most powerful people, the decision makers in this country, and speaking with such candor and clarity. And what's so interesting, Jody, and we remember this from the first Trump administration, Donald Trump is the master performer. He cut his teeth, so to speak, not only on real estate, but reality television. And so he's done this for a couple of years where he invites key individuals who will sit there with the First Lady, and then he weaves their personal stories and he connects it to policy. And what President Trump did brilliantly on Tuesday was to highlight some American stories of Americans who were negatively impacted by Biden-era policies. And again, the story of this young woman, traumatic brain injury, she's hit with a volleyball spiked in her face by a man masquerading as a woman. It's a horrific story. Her career is over. But again, highlighting this issue using the bully pulpit of the presidency. And again, it's not just been words, it's been actions. February 5th, he signed an executive order simply titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports. Again, I just imagine if my grandfather was alive today and I had to explain to him that the president of the United States was having to take an executive action to keep men out of women's sports. Any other generation would not have understood these conversations. It just shows how radical our moment is with transgender ideology. So again, Jody, how encouraging to, again, have a president who understands the issue. He knows the voters are with him and is just moving to make a difference on this issue in the face of all those Democrats who he knows just a couple days earlier had killed a bill that would have codified his executive order. So again,
right.
You see courage and clarity.
All right, David, I do want to get to, I want to give you the opportunity to speak about your book, but I got one more real quick question. You mentioned the Democrats earlier about them not standing. Give me your reaction to that. We don't have time for another clip, but I want to just get your reaction to that.
Yeah, it's regrettable that even on some of those stories where you have a police officer's widow or you have a young man being admitted into the military academy, stories where, again, a child brain cancer survivor who's deputized as a member of the Secret Service, these stories that you think everyone could get behind, and the Democrats refuse to even honor that. It shows the partisanship is at an all-time high, and I think as a Christian and as someone who looks at things through the lens of Worldview, it shows the worldview divide. We're dealing not just with ethanol subsidies or tariffs, or we're dealing with those issues, but we're dealing with creation order issues. And again, that's why these conversations are so important, because these get to the very nature of ontology and being. It's really important, and unfortunately, we see that divide in our parties.
Absolutely, we do. All right, David, we're about out of time, but I mentioned your book coming into this segment. Again, can you just remind folks briefly what the book is about and where they can find it? Outstanding book.
Well, that's kind, Jody. Yeah, Life After Roe, it looks at the abortion issue. It looks at the value of human life from a whole range of issues, whether it's polling that FRC has done, where I unpack where the church stands today on the issue, what the Bible teaches, what the church has taught for 2,000 years. And then I also look at some of the challenges facing the pro-life movement. Jody, overturning Roe was never the end goal for the pro-life movement. We want to make abortion unthinkable as well as illegal, but there's challenges in the way. And so the book looks at all of those issues, and my prayer is that it'll serve pastors, church leaders, and Christian parents. And again, you can go to lifeway.com, enter the title of the book, Jody, and then use that code, Washington Watch, just one word, Washington Watch, and you get 40% off. Grateful for my publisher giving that to the viewers and listeners of this program.
And yes, we are grateful for it as well. Everybody loves a great buy. But when you have a great buy on a great product, I mean, that's just a double blessing. Thank you so much, David Closson, Director of the Center for Biblical Worldview here at FRC.